little bit of background on myself. I spent the last few years on the service team here at PlanFees. And one of the more common questions I would get from advisors is, okay, I have the plan's 5,500. Is this going to be good enough for me to benchmark the plan? Do I need to go get more information? And this is specifically true with a prospect, specifically with the 5,500 data. This is usually the first place that most advisors will go because most advisors have access to some sort of 5,500 search database. So there's a lot of great information that can be found from a 5,500. You can sometimes find the lineup, different audit attachments with plan design features, or even the investments will be listed. But the tough thing with the 5,500 is that the fees are not fully disclosed on here. And so it can be very, very challenging when dissecting a 5,500 document to figure out what the total plan cost is, what's the record keeper keeping, what's the advisor keeping, what's the investment manager keeping. And so one of the pieces of advice I always give to advisors is to request the 408B2 fee disclosure. And 9 times out of 10, this can be done by just positioning it to a plan sponsor to say, I want to make sure that I have all the most current data for you to make sure that when we run this benchmarking report, it's accurate and it's relevant to your plan. And so with the request of that 408B2 disclosure, you can see on the right-hand side here, we have kind of an example of a Form 5500. Looks very tax form, kind of DMV type material. But the nice thing about 408B2 fee disclosures, it's spelled out more in much more plain English. So what I did here was I pulled a couple of snapshots from a plan's 408B2 disclosure. And the reason why I did this is because I think it's a great illustration of how easy these are to interpret. And so I pulled this random fee disclosure for a $5 million plan with 45 participants. And you could see it's clearly spelled out within the fee disclosure how much the record keeping charge is, what the advisor compensation is, and then how much the investment cost is, and then if the revenue sharing is being kept by the record keeper, credited back to the participants, etc. So with the 5,500 database, you'll be searching through for this information pretty extensively. With obtaining the 408B2 disclosure, it's as simple as just looking up a 2 to 3 page document and getting all this information in a matter of seconds. So that's a look at one plan sponsor's fee disclosure. So again, you can see here, we can easily identify the record keeping charge right on the page there. I pulled a couple other screenshots from another fee disclosure because there's some other important considerations that need to be made when you're benchmarking, like we talked about earlier. So for instance, it's important to know how many on-site meeting days is this plan being provided? What's the participant count? Is there any sort of proprietary fund structure? So you can see here with this plan, they gave a few different pricing models based on the fund selection of the advisor. So if they're going to go into proprietary target date funds, you're going to see about a 12 basis point price reduction. If you use an open architecture lineup, you can see this would be the pricing here. So again, this was all pulled from a 408B2 document. We have experts here at PlanFees that if you call in, we're more than happy to go over these with you and help you interpret these. If you ever get mixed up or anything like that, we have a dedicated PlanFees support line for that. So all these different considerations need to be made when you're looking at fee disclosures. Specifically, when you're looking at apples to apples scenarios, it's really important that all the different providers that are quoting a plan, or even your benchmarking service that you're using for annual benchmarking, is taking a look at plans in an apples to apples method, meaning if one plan provider quotes as open architecture, that's what all of the rest of the providers do. If one provider quotes using proprietary funds, that's what the rest of the providers do. So again, it's very important to make sure your fact set is straight and make sure you have all these different considerations input before you start your benchmarking. So taking that information and putting it into the PlanFees Prism system is incredibly easy. What I have here on the site is actually a snapshot of the data input screen for the PlanFees Prism benchmark report. And so it's just as simple as I was talking about, where you input the client name, what kind of plan you're working with, whether there's a TPA involved, and then the only 5 data points that you'll need are the plan assets, the number of participants, record keeping, advisor, and investment fees. And then if there's TPA or administration fees on top of that, you can put those in as well. Once you do that, you can hit create, and then the Prism benchmark will allow you to customize your benchmark universe down here below. So again, going back to the example that I mentioned a few minutes ago, you can see we were looking at plans between 3.5 and 6.5 million, but that's completely customizable by the advisor. If the advisor wanted to show their plan sponsor plans between 2 and 10 million, or 4 to 5 million, it's completely customizable by the advisor. And you can even narrow down the universe and add an extra filter with plan participants. So if you only want to look at plans that are between 3.5 and 6.5 million with between 40 and 70 participants, you can do that through PlanFees as well. Once you do that, you're going to get a breakdown of the current plan you see on the far left here, the total cost versus a low, average, and high of that universe that we were just talking about. And important thing to note about the low, average, and high here is that this is actually reflective of the 25th, 50th, and 75th percentile of that data set that we were setting here when we were looking at plan size. So the low is not the bottom basement pricing, and the high is not the highest that it can go. It's really to give you a barometer of what the low end is, what the high end is, and then what's the average of averages. So that's an important piece to know, and you get some nice visuals with the PlanFees report regarding looking at, how much of each component makes up the total cost. You can see here, this is another example from our reporting where we have in the purple on the far left for this plan, the current plan costs in terms of investments, record keeping, and advisory. And if you look at this close enough, you'll notice that this plan's record keeping charge is 82 basis points, which is way over the high of this PlanFees Prism universe. So as an advisor, if we just ran this benchmarking report, this is something that's going to catch our eye right away, and something that we want to make sure that the plan sponsor is aware of, to say, hey, we ran an independent benchmarking study on your plan, and we noticed that your record keeping charge is way out of the ballpark of what we normally see for plans of this size. So you can see here how this report can help put fee reasonableness in context for the plan sponsor based on their actual plan size. So they're not looking at, guidelines for a $10 million plan if they're only a $2 million plan. You're creating a custom benchmark that fits this plan specifically. And then just to give you all another look at the PlanFees, the output that PlanFees comes with, it breaks it out in both investment, record keeping, and advisory costs. You get the low, average, and high, and you also get a look at the dollar amount and the basis point value, which I think is really nice because plan sponsors seem to think better in hard dollar amounts. So if you can quantify, instead of saying, hey, we can save you 30 basis points, if you can quantify that and say, hey, we can save you $15,000 a year on your plan, that seems to be the most effective way to communicate this with plan sponsors and to show them what's important. And again, you can see in this example, the record keeping charge is 66, which falls between the average and the high. It's still worth pointing out to the plan sponsor to say, hey, this is where your record keeping charge lands. Let's take a deeper look and see what they're charging for, see if we can maybe skinny that up a bit, or if it's just right for what we're doing. All of that needs to be taken into consideration. Once you've run this annual fee benchmarking report, the next piece, like I said earlier, would be taking the plan out to bid and doing a more comprehensive RFP type report. So this will be done through a practice management platform like RPAG. There's a lot of different platforms out there that allow you to do live bid provider analysis. And essentially what you're doing is you're taking that set of facts that you gathered originally and then sending them to competitive record keepers and saying, hey, how would you price a plan that has 5 million in assets, 100 participants, and 250,000 in cash flow? And then you get the quotes. We also recommend as best practice, after you've gathered quotes from from competitive record keepers, is to aggregate those quotes into an average, take it back to the current record keeper and say, hey, we got some quotes from your competitors. Looks like you're a little bit above the average here. Do you want to maybe consider giving us a pricing concession? And so these live bid RFP type reports are not just useful in terms of moving a plan, or just when you're doing a new relationship. It's really a helpful exercise every 3 to 5 years to go through to make sure that you're keeping your plans, as the fees, as competitive as possible, and sharpening your pencil every year to make sure that the fees are reasonable. And so just to kind of wrap up here in terms of looking at the different plan cost components, what I've pulled up here is kind of an example of what you go through with a live bid RFP, where you're taking a look at the total plan cost numbers. And this is what most benchmark reports will do for you, is take a look at the total plan cost. And while that's incredibly important to do as kind of a 10,000-foot look at how much your plan costs, we at PlanFees believe that it's important to isolate the different components of a fee structure to identify and pinpoint what the actual problem is. So taking a look at the total plan cost for this plan, you can see the total plan cost is about $115,000, which is very competitive in terms of the different competing bids that they got for a plan of this size. Now, looking at it from this vantage point, you would say the current record keeper is doing a great job. They're giving really competitive pricing. However, if we start looking at the individual components here, what we'll see is, for instance, the investment management costs are way, way, way lower than the competitors' proposals, which would point to us, would say, hey, you're probably mostly in index funds. You're probably using mostly passive strategies. So that's probably a way that your record keeper is kind of artificially keeping your investment costs down. And it's also, you're probably missing out on some better funds that your participants can be enrolled in. And then switching over to the record keeping vantage point, you can see that the incumbent compared to the other bidders is way out of line in terms of what they're charging for the record keeper. So you can see here, if you bring this to the current record keeper, they'll see that they're $60,000 over what their competitors are willing to charge to service this plan. And so you can see here through those just couple quick looks that looking at a plan from a total plan cost perspective, while it's valuable and something that you should be doing, there are other more granular pieces that you need to take a look at to make sure that your client is receiving the best service for the best price that they can. So to kind of wrap up here, and what I hope you all kind of take away from what we're looking at here, is the whole benchmarking process is really aimed to maximize the negotiating leverage for your plan sponsors and your participants. At the end of the day, everything we do as retirement advisors is going to be to drive the best participant outcome that's possible. And benchmarking your plan's fees is a huge piece of that. Thanks a lot for watching today, folks. Again, my name's Luke Vandermillen. I'm with the PlanFees team. I can be reached at 949-305-3718 or lukev@planfees.com. That's V as in Veronica, lukev@planfees.com. Thanks again and have a great rest of your day.